Can you imagine going down in history for the stupidest comments ever made? And I'm not just talking about Joe Rutherford, who millions now living will never die, only come to find out they all did die. Think back to the late 18th century, what was going on in France. There was a major rift between the classes. Of course, you had your royalty, your aristocrats who were living quite well. The majority of the country was in turmoil. They were broke, they were poor, they were destitute. They were referred to as peasants. King Louis XVI had inherited the throne after his father died, and he was not quite ready to become king, but he did anyways. This problem was brought to their attention. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France at that time, when it was brought to her attention about the poor people in France, they don't have money to buy bread. What did she say? Let them eat cake. Ingenious. Well, as it was, the peasants revolted. King Louis had his head lopped off. Marie Antoinette, for the last few months of her life, was thrown into a dungeon, a very unsanitary dungeon, before her head was lopped off. It was some 2,000 years ago in Israel where the Messiah was born a human. Now, although Jesus Christ knew mankind's turmoil, he knew full well what they were going through, he had never lived as a human. Well, when he was born on earth, he wasn't born to royalty. He wasn't born to a particularly wealthy family either. No, his adoptive father, Joseph, was a carpenter. In turn, he raised Jesus and trained him as a carpenter. And being that he was a perfect human, he was probably the best carpenter that ever lived. Now, think about that. These are in the days there was no Home Depot, there were no power tools, so every stick of wood had to be chopped down from a tree. Had Jesus Christ been raised in a wealthy family or a royal family, would he have been able to understand fully what mankind was going through? Yes, a small percentage of mankind, but not the majority. No, to live as a human for his 33 years, although he was perfect, he had to feel the pain of mankind, and he did, right up until death. So it's only logical that his anointed brothers would be the same. If you look at the first century Christians, look at some of the things they went through. The Apostle Paul, he was also, by trade, he was a tent maker, and while he was out preaching, he had to stop to work to support his ministry. My question is for the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. Can they really fully empathize with the plights of mankind? Can they understand what Jehovah's Witnesses are going through? Use Russia for an example. Obviously, the brothers in Russia are being persecuted for their faith. And are the governing body actually empathizing with them? Oh, yeah, sure, they're giving pep talks and all like that, but are they sharing in the pain? No, they're not. And this goes for anywhere else in the world. Where are they? They're protected in their ivory towers. And there's a question, when was the last time any of these 8 Goombas actually held a job? And just how faithful and discreet are they? They're obviously not very discreet, especially when you got a guy like Samuel Hurd rubbing a Rolex in everybody's face, which is absolutely ridiculous. To me, the anointed of Christ would not be figureheads for a corporation that, trust me, are living much better than your average Jehovah's Witness. I can't say I know how much they make monetarily, but they live quite comfortably. Their housing is paid for, their health insurance is paid for, their food is paid for, and they're obviously wearing quite expensive suits, Rolex watches, so they are hardly poor. Can they empathize with the plights of mankind living like that? No, they can't. If they ever did in their lifetime, I'm sure they're forgotten. So really, are they really the faithful and discreet slave? Because no, they're not very discreet at all. No, the anointed of Christ would not be in one location. They would not be working for a wealthy corporation. They would not be huddled in one spot. There was a time where they considered all of the anointed within Watchtower a faithful and discreet slave, but that's changed. They now look at the anointed as domestics themselves. So now they consider themselves the only faithful and discreet slave. As I touched on in my last video, the faithful and discreet slave will not be chosen until Christ's second coming. And Christ has not returned. I don't care what any of Jehovah's Witnesses say. There was no scripture in the Bible that mentioned anything about an invisible presence. So if there is anything to that parable that Jesus told, it hasn't happened yet. And as far as Stephen Lett, a couple of years ago, coming out and said about the first nomination that they were chosen, this isn't a music award show, guys. The faithful and discreet slave have not been chosen yet. And they certainly wouldn't be in one location, in one religion. No, they would be very discreet, very common, not noticed. They wouldn't be wealthy, working for a corporation, wearing fancy jewelry. As a matter of fact, when they are chosen, they are going to be honest-hearted people. What does it say? And I believe it's at Matthew 10, verse 8. You receive free, give free. When was the last time the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses gave anything free? Nothing is free in that organization. No. When this servant of God is chosen, the anointed of Christ is chosen, they are not going to be outstanding individuals in the public arena. They're not going to be wealthy men. Much like the first century Christians, they're going to come from all walks of life and not out of one cult. They are going to be spread amongst the entire world. And the Bible was never very clear of food at the proper time. If you consider Watchtower's food at the proper time has changed so much, it's garbage. It's been tainted. Monsanto has treated all their spiritual food. A Jehovah's Witness that lived, say, 50 years ago, had he gone to a Kingdom Hall today, he wouldn't recognize a damn thing. If you compare Watchtower's literature today to Watchtower's literature, and I have the library dating back to the turn of the century, so I know how much it's changed. How can you consider spiritual food at the proper time if it has been discarded? And now all they do is update to fit current events and their new light, their new doctrines. First of all, there's nothing backing up this scripture about new light to begin with. So where do the faithful and discreet slave come from? Guys, I'm going to touch on this in my next video. And I'd love to hear your comments. And I will see you soon. You guys have a good day.